Welcome to Cover Book Beats. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. Today is a very special day for me as I celebrate 888 author interviews with the one that started it all. Ken Scholes, the award-winning author of the internationally acclaimed 5-volume Psalms of Isaac series and over 50 short stories. Now, this is the part of the introduction where I normally give the author's background, work experience, talk about their accomplishments and awards, and we'll get to that. But first, we have to go back in time to 2008. I was sitting in my cubicle with the Dallas Chronicle, a small daily newspaper, and checking my email, and yes, we had email back in those days, when a publicist email announced that Tor Books, one of the largest publishers of science fiction, would be sending out a monthly newsletter. And a rare and very lucky moment of why the hell not, I replied, well, there goes the rest of my spare time. The next day, the publicist emailed back and says, I see you work in a newspaper. Would you like to interview Tom Doherty? Now, he's the publisher and owner of Tor Books and founder of it. I nearly scorched the keyboard in my haste to reply, and that ultimately led to an interview and a half-page story. When we were talking after the interview, Mr. Doherty suggested, since I was a good guy, I'd like to be on the panel of reviewers. I said, oh, yes. And later on, one of the people in the office said, hey, you know, we've got a hot new author, this Ken Scholes guy, who also happens to live in Oregon. And he's got this really interesting background. He was a soldier, a sailor, a minister, nonprofit executive, public procurement specialist, and label gun repairman. And a singer-songwriter who's performed musician for over 30 years and gigs alone with others around the Northwest. And that led to interview number 1, June 28, 2009, which opened with the words, "Change is the path that life takes." And there have been plenty of changes in the past 16 years, and since then he's completed the other 4 books in the Psalms of Isaac series for Tor. More than 50 short stories have been collected in 3 volumes published by Fairwood Press, and today we're delighted to report he's added a baker's dozen to that total with his brand new 4th collection of short stories, Better Dreams, Fallen Seeds, and Other Handfuls of Hope. We're very pleased to welcome back Ken Scholes.
It's good to be here, Roger.
Yeah. When you were growing up, had you ever thought you were going to be a writer?
Yes. I mean, I was going to be a writer. Somewhere along the way, by 2nd grade, I was stapling little books together that were going into the school library under the auspices of my 2nd grade teacher. And then by high school, I was handwriting short stories and then typing them up and sending them out for submission my sophomore year. So I started pretty early.
How many times did you have to send something out? How many rejection slips have you got? Everybody has a whole bunch to start with, but
I collected 75 before I sold a piece of fiction, and then after that, I kind of stopped counting. I still, you still get rejected all the way through your career, but I started. It took 75 to get that first sale back in the year like 1999, and my first short story came out in the year 2000. So the collection marks 25 years of me in print.
Yeah,
which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, we are so glad that you did decide to be an author. And that same year in October, we reviewed Canticle, the 2nd book in the Quintology. And we mentioned you're going to have a release party and the first book signing of Canticle on its very first day of release at Clint's Booksellers, which is the oldest bookstore in Oregon and happens to be located in my town, the Dalles, Oregon. And you even treated us with some of your songs. Now, since then, full disclosure, we met up at a number of science fiction conventions and book signings. And more recently, you've been visiting and performing at the Oregon Veterans Home, which is also located in the Dalles. And now, that brings us to Better Dreams, Fallen Seeds, and Other Handfuls of Hope. As you mentioned, this spans a whole bunch of your career, going way back as well. Some appeared in various previous publications, but all are making, as I understand, their first appearance in book form. Is that correct?
Well, now the short stories with my collections, most of the time, they get picked up by magazines or anthologies for a while, and then when there are enough of them, I gather them up. We gathered up the first one. We had enough in 2008 after selling, starting to sell in 2000. Second one, a little faster in 2011. We had another 16 or 17 stories. And then we did the third one about a decade ago at the Spokane World Con. And then I took a break.
Yeah, right.
And it took a decade, but after that decade of selling a few short stories, finding a few that hadn't yet been collected, we basically had enough for a 4th collection. So.
All right. One of the oddball questions, and I have a lot of them for you as well because you can handle it. One of the first interview about lamentation, we noticed that a close friend had been asked to name the one truest thing about Rudolfo, the protagonist of Psalms of the Isaac series, and the friend had replied, "He always knows the path to take. He always takes it, regardless of the consequences." And before you could answer, your wife said it was the same true of you. Is it still the truest thing about you?
Probably that, and the fact that I seem to have a pretty good level of insight if I can turn it on and access it, right? But yeah, that I care very much about figuring out what the right thing to do is, and then I usually do everything in my power to do it when I know, once I know.
All right. We have to dig into the book itself because I found it absolutely fascinating. This is now there are anthologies that collect people's work in collections of short stories, and some of them are the same story repeated 20 times. These are far from that. I mean, you've got stuff that's horror related, you've got some alien invasion stories, you've got conspiracy things. I want to go through a couple of them here, and one of the things that intrigued me is when you put this together, sequencing is important. The order of the stories. And I notice you start with something that's a little dark and you end with something that's very positive. That was intentional, I assume.
Intuitively so, maybe, but probably intentional on Sarah's part. Now, Sarah Chorn, who's my new writing bestie, I hired her to do the initial pass on putting this collection together, and she organized the stories based on a flow that she picked up as she was editing all of put it all in one corral and start to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very collaborative process, and there was it was laid out a certain way, and then I looked at it. I don't think we did a lot of tweaking of that, but I don't know who came up with the original layout, but it was probably her.
Okay. But that is intriguing. And I also want to talk a little bit about some of the styles here. And the first story, the first bar at the end of the day, this is a style I haven't seen in a long time. It's like the single narrator you're just doing one side of the conversation and you imply the other person's by however he responds. Was that interesting to write for you?
It was, and it was a product of me waiting to pick up somebody downtown, and I was hanging out at a gay bar. So originally the story was called Last Gay Bar at the End of the Day, or First Gay Bar at the End of the Day, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then as I was, I found it in a pile of stories, and I started reading it, and I thought, this feels really solid. And then I got through it and realized, well, crap, this is a whole story that I just forgot I wrote, I guess. And it was intended to be a conversational, kind of like the old conversationals with Poe, where you've got the narrator telling the dark story there. And I don't remember initially who I had it intended for. I just knew that I wrote it. But it's the story really that launched my friendship with Sarah. She was doing editorial work on a magazine called Grimdark. They had told her they were looking for stories. She passed that to me. I passed this story over to her, and I ended up starting to publish with them, and then starting to work with Sarah on my work, and then our friendship just kind of took off from there. And she's my first new close writing friend since John passed away. So that's been really important.
Yeah, we have to talk about John Pitts and Jay Lake at some point in this because they're important to you. And we'll show. We have a picture that I took at it was Jay Lake's last birthday party with you and Jay and John and with what's her name? This popped out of my head. Mary Cole.
Mary Robinette?
Yeah, Mary Robinette. Yeah.
Mary Robinette Cole.
Yeah. And it's the, I would call them the four winds or something like that because they blow in different directions. There are so many good. I chortled when I read the next one, which is making my entrance again with my usual flair. And before I get to that, I want to mention the fact that as an old DJ, I love the fact that you are a singer-songwriter and you use that reference because that, of course, that title is from the Send in the Clowns, Stephen Sondheim song that Judy Collins made famous. And you have a thing about clowns. Tell me about that.
Well, it's interesting. I would have never thought that until you just said it, but I realize now that one of the formative shows in my childhood was a local show called JP Patches.
Hmm.
About it was a local clown, lived in a junkyard, had a what appeared to be a cross-dressing clown named Gertrude. It was an important staple to my childhood. But really, Jay had a bigger thing with clowns, and I was running around in his wake. So he had
Hmm.
a project called 44 Clowns that he was going to do. And so I, of course, got a story in there, Four Clowns of the Apocalypse and the Mecca of Mirth.
Yeah.
And he and I have a collaboration we never finished, that has a character in it called Fucko the Clown. And so some of it is just me following my buddy, but some of it I think is that JP Patch's influence.
JP Patches was, I think, a Seattle television
Yeah,
station that
yeah,
broadcast that, because you grew up in Washington State.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This particular one, I don't want to give away too much, but let's put it, when you've got something that has talking monkeys in it, even if they're
Yeah.
not real monkeys, you've got a winner right there. I mean, and
It's
the humor in that's awesome.
It was a story it should have been collected in my third collection, but
Hmm.
we missed it somehow going over my body. Because what we try to do is when there's enough stuff that's appeared originally somewhere else, then we put together a collection. But that one, somewhere, it appeared around 2011, probably, I think, on Reactor, which was
Hmm.
Tor.com back then.
Yeah.
That was my Writers of the Future story. When you win Writers of the Future and you go to their workshop, you're given a 24-hour story to write, and they give you a combination of things like a little found object. For me, it was a little monkey that looked like it had three eyes, and they send you off to do interviews, to do all these interesting things to help writers learn how to just be writers out in the world finding stories. And that story was important because it represented kind of a breakthrough in me being told to write on demand and learn to accept the story that shows up. When you throw your bait in the water and the fish rises, you don't get to decide what fish is rising.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure your hook is baited and ready to grab it.
Yeah.
So that story was one of those wins where I learned a little bit about myself, and I jammed that out in, it was a few hours. It was a story that I cranked out in hours, not days.
And I will have to say, this is the one I would like to see a lot more of. I think there's a novel in that. I really do.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that'd be interesting and fun. I think it'd definitely make a fantastic short movie.
Oh,
Um,
oh yeah.
of a road trip to Roswell.
Yeah. Very, very good. Again, I don't want to give away it, but let's put it this way: the monkey is not what he appears to be at the
Yeah.
beginning. All right.
No, the talking part might give it away.
Yep. Harley takes a wife. I notice that this has a bunch of humor in it as well. I like the line "Bring your cactus to work day,"
Yeah,
which is in there, and this is set in some. This kind of like subcategory of science fiction that has to do with asteroid miners and
yeah,
what happens with them. This is one of those, and he's a lonely miner, and he's looking for company, and he gets involved. And I love the fact that it's Acme Artificials Incorporated, which gives me vibes of Wile E. Coyote in the
yeah,
background. Yeah, and I that was
yeah. I was
intentional.
absolutely going for that. And that story, I was surprised how that one came off. There was an original story concept called Harley Finds a Wife from the 90s when I was just starting out. And this was a kind of, sometimes ideas circle back around. And in this case, I'd been asked by an editor to write a space Western. And I had a universe already created from my story, A Good Hair Day in Anarchy, which I think was in my second or third collection. So I set this in the frontier system of that world, a place I can go back and do more stories in. And I was pleased. This one got me compared to Mark Twain, which I thought was funny,
Whoa.
to compare me to they called it a campfire tale, which is lovely.
Yeah, and it's a mail order bride essentially. It's what
Yeah,
we're talking about here.
yeah, yeah,
And this is one of the real delights in this. Again, this is I was so surprised at some of these. You have not one but two things set in the Psalms of Isaac worlds, and I love
wow,
that.
yeah, yeah. That's right. There are two in there, aren't there? I forgot about that. Yeah, we've got one that's set early in the days when Rodolfo and Gregorick went to sea. That was
Yeah,
a love letter that I wrote to John, really,
yeah,
because Gregorick, we discovered was who he was in the series. He just didn't make it out of the first book, so
yeah,
I had to go back in time to tell a story about him. And
yeah,
then the other was a story asked for by Robert Silverberg and Brian Thomas Schmidt for their Robots of the Ages. They initially wanted the Isaac story. I told them they could either have Isaac or Edward Bear. Both are
yeah, Yeah.
suitable robot stories, but they wanted Isaac. And then their publisher said, well, could you ask them to write a new Isaac story? And that was an interesting challenge because Isaac never has a point of view
Hmm.
in the series. And so this gave me actually a short story that started building the bridge ultimately to the new series that I'm working on now.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely fascinating. And I do have to. You mentioned in an afterword that let's talk a little bit about John because John Pitts, who's Black Blade Blues and the following sequels to that, about the amazing lesbian blacksmith dragon hunter
yeah.
and slayer, set in a modern fantasy series. We did a bunch of interviews together, and I get to know him as well, not as well as you did, obviously, but you were so tight. And you
Yeah.
mentioned that Greg Rick is based loosely on John Pitts.
Yeah.
And I want to
Yeah.
highly recommend his stuff to anybody that's watching this as well.
Oh yeah, totally. He's also got a short story collection out at Fairwood Press, where my short story collections are.
Okay,
Um,
good to know about that. And as long as we're mentioning him, we should mention your mentor in many ways, Jay Lake, who
yeah.
unfortunately both of them passed away. And I did get a chance to interview him for one of his last books, so he will be in this series that I collect.
Yeah, he was a powerhouse. Jay was really instrumental in my writing career. John was instrumental in all the rest of my life, as far as that anchoring kind of brotherhood that saw me through some of the harder corners.
Yeah, yeah. And again, both awesome people, and I was delighted. Thank you for letting me introduce me to both of them because it made my life brighter, and I appreciate that.
Well, you've been a bright spot in my life. I hate that we kind of fell out of touch for a few years during my hiatus, but
Yeah,
finding you again over there in the Dalles
yeah.
has been a great gift.
Thank you. Well, it goes both ways for sure. I have to go. Now as an old DJ. When I see somebody who references music, and I got stuck in Buenos Aires with Bob Dylan on my mind, which references Stuck Inside a Mobile with Memphis Blues again, and there's 28 songs referenced in this because I
Oh my
counted
goodness,
them.
you counted them all.
Oh, heck yes. I even have a list here. But
Oh, that's great.
you go from everything from Lefty Frizzell and Hank Williams Sr. to the Everly Brothers, James Taylor, Bruce Springsteen, Gordon Lightfoot, the Byrds, John Coltrane for all and Simon and Garfunkel have 4 of the references of the 38.
Of course.
And you've said, I think, that they're your go-to when you need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever see them play live?
I did. I saw Paul Simon with Sting, which was great, and then I saw the reunion in 2004 with Simon and Garfunkel, the Old Friends tour, which was amazing. I cried. But yeah, they were the music that my brother introduced me to when I was very small before he died. And to this day, when I need it, whether it's for calm or for focus when I'm writing and I'm a little stuck, I put that on my headphones and I'm good to go.
Yeah, I will have to say I was lucky enough to see them in 1970 at the University of Oregon, and that was the tour that they did, and their encore was "Bye Bye Love."
Oh yeah,
and when they
that's the version that got captured for Bridge Over Troubled Water album, probably.
It was. I've later researched, and it wasn't at Mac Court in Eugene. It was at another performance, but it was on that tour, and the audience reaction is just insane when that breaks in because how perfectly to mention another couple that awesome harmonies. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I can get lost in the music stuff, so I won't do that because I'm forced to by talking about you and this fabulous book here. You mentioned Brian Thomas Schmidt, and The Greatest Guns in the Galaxy is one you collaborated with.
Yeah.
You've done a few collaborations, and how does that work with you when you do that?
All of them are different. In that case, Brian had already written a draft, and I don't remember how much of the draft was complete. But he asked me, it was very sweet. I had just gone on a hiatus, and I had decided that I was not going to be pursuing the writing publication the same way that I had been, that I was going to write short stories when an editor asked me for a short story, and I would go teach writing if they were covering my expenses and maybe even paying me, but just covering my expenses. So I wasn't paying out of pocket to continue doing my dance. Yeah. And I decided to kind of back off of all of that. And this was just after I had written Stuck in Buenos Aires with Bob Dylan on my mind for Brian. And he came to me and said, well, hey, I don't have anything new coming for a while, but I'm working on a thing for David Boob. And he's got another anthology that's coming out. And would you be willing to help me with this story? It's a loose tribute to, there's references in there to John and to Jay. And I don't remember a ton about it other than he gave me a draft. I worked on it a little bit. We passed it back and forth. We finished it up, got it into David. David liked what we did. But each collaboration is a little different. When Jay and I collaborated on our two stories that I think are in the third collection, we each started a file and we each wrote about half a story, and then we traded files and finished the other person's story. And we did that on a stage at Borderland Books in San Francisco with an audience. Writing a short story, that's like watching the paint dry. Watching a writer write half of a short story. So that was a few hours of sitting in a warm room with laptops, and that was a lot of fun. John and I did a collaboration, and in that case, we passed scenes back and forth, and we had some of our first big fights when John and I tried to collaborate because we thought so differently at the time about story. And that, of course, was like 2005. Now I'm working on collaborations as I try to get my car back on the road after years of not.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm doing is trying to collaborate with other writers, newer writers, as a way, of kind of paying forward. So I've got a couple of collaborations underway with newer writers right now that we'll see how they turn out. I think they'll be okay.
All right. Well, and I will have to say that the Greatest Guns in the Galaxy is a hoot again, and humor plays a big part in your stuff because you are a happy guy, I think. And
I am now. I used to not be,
yeah.
But I also, even when I wasn't happy, I've always understood the importance of humor, even in the darkness.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and again, this is Aliens. It's another space western in a sense because
it's a space western. It was for a space western. David Booth was editing a series of these. Harley Takes a Wife was a story that was written for a later space western.
Okay, and it involves aliens and gunfights, and you don't need to know any more than that. Moving on through that, number 7, The Monster Under the Bed is a transformation story, and it's kind of maybe having to do with acceptance sometimes. I feel that,
and it's a little bit of metamorphosis, a little bit there in the end. But it's also my PTSD story, and I've taken that story and I've wrapped it up in about 7 or 8 songs and turned it into my show, Making Friends with the Monsters Underneath Your Bed. And it's a part of when I go out and do that show, particularly, I'm speaking to PTSD, and that's. That was a therapy story. I was in therapy. I was working through issues around my life and the things I was learning. And I was learning that the monsters underneath my bed were mine. I had put those there to protect me from the monsters my parents put in the closet. And so learning to make friends with them and shift the story, the narrative of what's happening.
Fascinating, because I know that you did not have one of those squeaky clean childhoods that a lot of people do.
Yeah. No, I had a really painful childhood. I ended up spending most of my adult life figuring that all out before I could experience kind of true joy. And, until you figure out how to love and accept who you are and where you come from and all of those bits and pieces, it's hard to accept it from anybody else or to extend it to anybody else effectively. So
that's it. I just have a weird question that crossed my mind here. You have, let's put it this way, more of a blue-collar background than a lot of writers do. Does he think that gives you a particular advantage in being able to have a true voice of people from that background?
I just have such a big background. It's a mix of blue and white, I think, because I've run nonprofit, organizations in the community economic development sector. I've been a civil servant since 2005, other than a 4-year break, working for Multnomah County here in Oregon as a senior procurement analyst, doing software purchases. So that's a pretty white collar kind of job, but it's a union job. I'm a part of the AFSCME union. My first jobs were, babysitting and mowing lawns as a kid, trailer boy, growing up near the forest. But my first real job when I turned 16 was at the Enumclaw Public Library, putting books on shelves. And so I kind of had a mix. I've been in the 2 branches of the service. I've managed a state farm insurance agency in the afternoons when I was in college. I fixed label guns. I had a little label gun repair office in a warehouse of a merchandising company. I've just had I think that I've just had a lot of life, and writers and songwriters
Mhm.
just they need a lot of life to pull. They pull all of those materials from that wide life, and I think the wider the life, the wider and more, broader our vision when it comes to stories and songs.
Wow. Very interesting answer. Thank you for that one.
Mhm.
And let me hide myself in these, obviously, from Rock of Ages.
Yeah.
And this one is, I can see this as a Tom Cruise movie, actually.
Oh yeah.
Or
That'd be great.
it's an action adventure conspiracy
Mhm.
theory with some very strong people involved, very strong characters. You write strong women, and you don't write
I
wimpy
do
women.
now, but
Yeah.
I didn't used to. I used to write, breasts with heads that walked
Uh,
around. And
uh,
I mean that's how they, I had a lot to learn. And actually Jen was a part of that. Jen, in when I, my whole body of work, I had all these short stories, probably close to a dozen of them out before anybody ever saw a novel from me. And nobody cared. The markets were so small. Nobody really was saying, hey, Scholes has a problem with misogyny and how he
yeah.
writes women.
Yeah.
It didn't come out until Lamentation came out and until my collection came out, and there was enough visibility around it all. But I remember Jen in 2006 just telling me in the car on the way home from work, I'm finding a problem with your book, and I'm not sure if I should tell you about it now or wait until you're done. And I said, well, will it change how I write the second half of it? Because I'm halfway done. And she said, "Oh, I think that, yeah." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me." And she told me, your women at this point are all other than Jin Lee Tam, they're all
Yeah.
servants or whores, and
Yeah.
that's not how the world works. And
Yeah.
this is the trope. And I began to see, oh shit, this is me reading a lot of Robert E. Howard and a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs and a lot of J.R.R. Tolkien, whose trees talked more than his women
Yeah.
in his work. And so it challenged me to really see how much of and I already was beginning to deal with, there's a cultural layer of homophobia that I was dealing with, as a boy that grew up and became a preacher. And transphobia we didn't even have a word for it because we didn't have a word for trans people that
Yeah.
was very effective. So all of these things where I had to stretch my heart, and stretch my understanding and let life stretch it a little. But she got me on the road, to that, and pointed that out to me. And then, of course, the rest of the world jumped on the back of it when Lamentation came out and people saw like the first half of it. We didn't go back and fix the first half. And
Uh,
it slid through the editorial process enough for me to take a beating out in the world initially when it came out. But then Winter shows up at the end of Lamentation, and I give her voice in the second book, and more characters show. Rhea shows up, and all these different, and so it was really a floodgate that opened for me. If you look at my first short story collection, there are no female protagonists and no female voiced stories. But from my second collection forward, I've always had some.
Speaking of voice, I just realized that we were going to ask you to read a section for us
Oh
today.
yeah, I mean,
And this is a paragraph that you have fun mentioning tropes of some classic science fiction stories. And it's taken from the point of view of an alien who's stranded on Earth and talking to another
yeah.
one about that.
Yeah. And this story was I got to go to France in 2013 for the series. Lamentation had won Best Translated Novel in 2011, so they brought me out to sign books and go to a festival. And this story was I wandered France with a guitar, and put together the pieces of this story. And so this is a section in the story where I'll just go ahead and read it. Carmichael paused, an equivalent of taking a deep breath before delivering bad news. Our options are limited. Earth is a bagged world. Great, I muttered. Bagged meant it was being monitored for its social evolution and kept in the dark about the rest of us just down the way. If you wonder why, go watch how my kind is typically portrayed in your popular entertainment. We blow up your big important buildings, messily kill people, and then succumb to some ultimately silly end in a triumph of the human spirit. Or we show up as your pals, cure cancer, and give you a sneak peek at our cookbook as we start measuring you for our frying pans. Or, this one is especially good, after traversing millions of light years, we arrive completely incompetent and need someone from your species to help us return to our galactic culture. Notice a pattern? You all don't treat each other much better, truth be told.
I love that because you mentioned at least three major classic alien stories. One of them being To Serve Man, which is the one about the
Mhm.
cookbook. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you do it in a way that flows. That's one of the things I want to say about this particular book and the way it was organized. I felt a real flow, even though this goes way back in your career, but I felt that develop as I read through this. And I said, this guy really knows what he's doing. Of course, I've known that for a while, but
Well, I appreciate that. I feel very fortunate to get to be me, to get to do this. And part of that is getting to sit down on a Sunday morning and talk to you.
yeah,
It's a
alrighty.
great gift.
There are, and here's one from the greatest guns in the galaxy. I was going to mention because I've got my cheat sheet over here. This is one little thing you said. Marriage thought humans had odd burial rituals. The stone were plain, no valuable minerals had been used. What kind of respect did they have for their dead? That's a microcosm of a different way of looking at things. And I think John W. Campbell told the writers, I want somebody, an alien who thinks as well as a human, but different. And there's an example of that right there. What do you value?
What, and I don't know if that's from me or if that was from Brian's contribution, because
Oh,
it
oh
was
yeah.
all us throwing different bits of ourselves into that crock pot. But it could have been easily, and I think that that's just a norm. When we try to write aliens, we're always wanting something that's human enough for humans to connect and experience story, but alien enough for humans to say, oh, I barely recognize this.
Yeah. This is a totally different way of looking at things. Yeah. What else was it? Oh, again, we're at Let Me Hide Myself in Thee. You have, and I see this. This has got as much action as any John Wick movie in it. And this is a really there's a high body count in this one, but you have you have this mental picture of a man riding a rock down, a la Slim Pickens and Doctor Strangelove and the Bomb.
Yeah.
And it just that mental image is going, okay, we know where he's coming from.
So this was a collaboration with Jay, but it was a different kind of collaboration with Jay because there's a story it was supposed to be called Rock of Ages Cleft for Me. And then my story is Let Me Hide Myself in Thee. But Jay didn't like the length of the title, so he changed it to Rock of Ages. So there is a story before my story, or simultaneous with my story. Jay has Bashar riding the rock down in his story, but then I have my story built upon the back of it. And this was for Metatropolis, which was Audible had done the original Metatropolis with John Scalzi, and Jay was involved. Then for the second version, I was involved as a writer, and Jay was the editor. And then for the third one, Jay and I edited together, but we also decided to make our stories interlinking. And ultimately, the stories from Metatropolis, Jay's stories and my stories have all been collected since they're interconnected, and they deal with now I can't remember the name of my she was in Symmetry of Serpents and Doves. It's the woman's mom.
Yeah.
In the story you're reading, there's a whole book of that called The Wings We Dare Aspire, Metatropolis, The Wings We Dare Aspire, that was put out, never reviewed, barely ever read by anybody. Wordfire Press put it out the week Jay died. Jay touched a copy of it just before he died. But it's our only book out there together, and it's got those stories in it synced up so that you can actually read the whole flow of that story.
Well, there goes the rest of my weekend.
Haha. Yeah, you have to go find it. If you buy that and review it, you'll be the first person. Jay's been gone 11 years. And if somebody gets a review of that out there, that'd be an amazing treasure because nobody's reviewed that book. It's been just out. You can see it on Amazon. Well, I haven't checked Amazon lately, but the last time I checked, there were no reviews.
All right. This will happen. I predict.
I love it, Roger.
All righty. I have a couple of more fun things that you do. Under Better Dreams Than These, you have more fun with more tropes. The Jungles of Venus with the Tarzan analog who is raised by four-armed green apes of Venus. And it also has kind of a Barsoom feel to it because of the four arms.
Yeah.
So were you reading?
Well, I kind of going for a creepy older uncle too, younger uncle, younger nephew, older uncle. I was tying together all the different stuff, to put together a very different. That story to me marks, I think, the most deft use of change is the path life takes. If you
Hmm.
look at the first story of mine that I had published versus that story, Better
Hmm.
Dreams Than These, and the way that it ends and what it's really about, the sense of a person's liberation from the suffering they've created for themselves with the stupid things they've believed.
Yeah.
Um, that story to me feels like a really powerful, important story in my story.
And it references in an oblique way the 12-step process because it talks
Absolutely.
about higher
Yep.
power and whatnot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And the 12 steps are what I used initially to climb up. Before I understood that I had complex PTSD, before I understood that I knew that I was in recovery from my fucked up childhood, the
Yeah.
dysfunction of that childhood, that I was in a recovery process, that my life had become powerless because of all of that, and that I was needing help. And so that those 12 steps became, remember, I have my 12-step book out,
Uh,
was looking at it. Those 12 steps became that fundamental path initially, out of my, because folks think of it as alcoholism, addiction. It's any process where we need to let go of something that's difficult to let go of and take hold of something that we don't understand.
yeah. But just amazing stuff. And also in this book, again, as I take a lot of notes when I read, you mentioned the Space Force first conceived by the Orange Prophet and Divine Commander Pence.
Yeah.
Who could you have been referencing here?
Well, and it was for the Space Force anthology.
Yeah.
Um, Bob Brown had asked me to write it. There's a whole anthology of stories set in the Space Force, founded by Trump.
Hmm.
And that story is my story. That story is my middle finger to authoritarianism and Trump and the stupid
Yeah.
beliefs that I used to lay hold of as a young
Yeah.
Republican man when I was a preacher boy.
Yeah. And by the way, I've enjoyed helping you recover some of those lost sermons that you had.
Yes. Yes, you have been an amazing gift in my life for a lot of reasons, but most recently, your ability to get all of these cassettes that I've kept all these years, thinking someday I'll need this information, and technology arrived, and then you arrived with the technology, and I've been able to go into that time machine and hear my words and hear my songs when I was in my 20s, and I am full of gratitude to you for helping
Uh,
that happen.
oh, well, thank you. And that was pretty fascinating. I will have to say that you were pretty darn good as a preacher. You were approachable.
You helped me see that I was always pointed in the direction. I was looking for love and joy, and I
Yeah.
was not trying to make people afraid. I was
Yeah.
truly trying to do good with those things.
Yeah. So you can accept, maybe that helps down the road in looking at the back on your life. Um,
Yeah,
and,
it does.
and then you have, oh gosh, dear. That when I waked, I yearned to dream again, which
Oh, that's
is
the oldest story in here. That's the
okay.
oldest, darkest. That's the darkest story I have ever written.
And I will
Deep dark therapy story.
I won't say about it except how shall I put it? This way, Santa, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and a higher power turn out not to be good people or good
Yeah, it ends up
beings.
when we hurt a child,
Yeah.
it affects their belief system. And that belief system is affected until it's corrected, until it's healed.
Mhm.
And all of the magic that we believe in, that gives us, grace and love, it goes away. It stops
Yeah.
being able to produce it. This was the darkest story I'd ever written. And of course, I was learning that my writing was a scalpel that helped me kind of do the surgery to recover and excavate the parts of my soul. Dig it out from all the dead flesh around it. And that story was definitely. I remember one of the rejections I got on that story was not only is this the darkest story I've ever read, you're so good in writing dark that I don't ever want to see anything from you again. they,
Oh
they,
wow.
they didn't want me to submit anymore. And of course, I was fearless. I read it publicly. It came out in Insidious Reflections, a horror magazine back in the day.
Yeah.
And I have not ever tried to collect the story. Patrick Swenson at Fairwood really was not very enthusiastic about me collecting the story. But for the fourth collection, we decided, yes, It's a part of my body of work. It was an important part of my recovery. It's an important story. I think, even though it's a painful story, I think for people to get through. But
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And okay, from there, we go into a beautiful story from the Psalms of Isaac universe of homeward dreams and fallen seeds and melodies by moonlight. And again, this sets the stage for this. You are officially announcing you are going back to the universe to write it again.
yeah, yeah. And this gives me a nice bookmark because this story takes place a few years after all of the events of the Psalms of Isaac. And that'll also mean that, this will become a part of the ending of the new Pilgrims of the Dream series. And so Pilgrims of the Dream picks up about halfway through the fourth book of my series, and the first book ends at the ending of the last book of the Psalms of Isaac, and then the second book picks up, shortly after. So I believe that this story may actually become an anchor at the end of the new series. I just don't know. I don't know how it all plays together yet because it hasn't revealed itself to me, but it will.
And you say partway through writing that first book in the new series?
I'm almost finished with the second chapter. I'm a little over 10,000 words.
All right.
And I know I'm moving slow. I'm learning how to write a novel without being under contract. My life has changed, a good deal this last little bit. My kids are getting ready to, graduate high school in about a year. So I don't know what it'll all look like, but I know that, I'm going to get this novel done and then see if Tor wants to continue the adventure. And if they don't, this will become my first trunk novel, and I'll get on and write other stuff. It'll be fine.
I want to go into the last two stories in the book, which really affected me positively. These are uplifting stories in a huge way. They have very sympathetic characters. They deal in some way with grief, but they also deal with surprises. In Business in Great Waters is a 12th story in the book, and it's set actually partly in Garibaldi, Oregon. I like the fact you use Northwest scenes for a lot of your stuff. And
do I know the secret? The secret is that turns Garibaldi into a great tax write-off. Go visit Garibaldi to research a short story.
I remember some years ago talking to an author at one of the conventions in Portland, one of the Oricons, who had been to Hawaii and written about it. And I said, "Do you write that off?" He says, "Oh, hell yes. That's one of the big advantages is because this is research." So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you also, I just have to mention that this is where a person discovers an unusual heritage involving people in the water. And who I think it's her grandfather she's never met before, who is lighting a stub of a Swisher Sweet. And boy, does they take me back to my college days.
Me too.
The little 5-pack with a little plastic tip on the end.
The first cigar I ever had was a Swisher Sweet. My granddad used to smoke them.
And so did my granddad. One of my grandfathers did. So it's interesting about that. And it is, in fact, I've written a note to myself. This is a lovely, soft story about people discovering family they didn't know they had. And I love that.
And it was a little surprising story. It was a product of I had a friend who had just graduated from some important thing, some kind of maybe a master's program or something, and so we did a driving loop of the coast, both of us looking for a story, and that was the story that I found. I go out and I make the trips, and I gather the raw ingredients. Like we went and we saw Jim's biplane rides and all the different bits and pieces that go into a story, and then I write the story later. I don't do the writing while I'm on the trip. While I'm on the trip, I live life fully, and then I go work the story up. I find the story and I write the story.
Well, it also lets you absorb and put it in context with all the rest of your life if you take a step away.
It's just it's like a big Dutch oven that everything just goes in and it just cooks up.
Here you go. And the very last story in the book, Evermore, I told the Raven, obviously as a response to Poe's Nevermore. This and I have love stories that involve bookstores, and this involves a bookstore and twins, and it has so much backstory to this that's built into it. And that's one of the things you do very well is, and I'm thinking of some of the other stuff that you do that implies a huge backstory where they mention casually things that imply a whole bunch of stuff that's taken place.
Yeah, that's kind of how I do it. And then I think if somebody did a deep dive into my work, they would find all kinds of esoteric references both to my life and to cultural pop culture and literature and music, and
Yeah.
it all goes in. That story was really important because that was the first story I wrote after Jay died.
Ah.
And after when he died, I owed a story to somebody, and it took me 8 tries. It never takes me 8 tries to write a story,
Yeah.
but it took 8 attempts to write that story before I came back to my first idea, which was a guy driving home for his brother's funeral.
Yeah.
And it really has to do with it had to do with Jay, but it later applied to John, and it kind of applies to everybody I've ever lost or will lose.
Yeah.
But it's a story about, again, yeah, love and family and loss and hope.
Mhm. You always have hope in your stuff, even when, except for the really dark things, you've always got at least a smidgen there.
A little smidge, right? A little tiny bit. I think that's because I've needed a little smidge here and there to make my life make sense. And I think that we turn to story to find hope, even the tiny bits of it.
Yeah, we do. I want to cite a line that my note to this: a light snow fell, and I could hear each snowflake singing, a billion-voiced choir in the night as it drifted down. And I wrote in caps an amazing image tossed in casually. That's what a pro writer does.
Well, thank you. I love that I get to do this, and I've had interesting moments as we've talked a little bit about what it means to get older.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be 58 in less, a couple weeks. I'll be 58 years old, and I'm feeling every year of it. But I'm also just feeling really grateful that I have been able to capture so much of my life with stories and songs that I hope will live past me for a little while, and give people comfort and insight and amuse them, entertain them.
You've done all of that and more. Is there anything that we haven't touched on you want to make sure gets in this interview? Because this is one of the longer ones I've done with a very special reason. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I really am big on these days, it's more important to me to help other people figure out their path, since I've got mine figured out and mine's going pretty well. So, I guess the piece that I would say is that I'm right now, a lot of my focus is helping newer writers or people who are just trying to stand their life up in the arts some way, like whether it's music or painting or writing, but making myself available. For instance, I'm culling my library of writing books, and I'm giving books to people that might help them. I'm collaborating with newer writers in the hope of, both getting me motivated, but also getting them published in the world. Right. And so, I guess just a PSA that if a person watches this and they're like, man, I wish I wrote stories like Ken Scholes. Okay, well, reach out to Ken Scholes and ask him how he does it. And he probably will set aside some time to talk to you about it. Best way for people to reach me is going to be through my website or through Facebook. If they just send a friend request and a note at the same time saying, hey, I saw your interview with Roger and I'm really interested in talking. The other thing is that I also do the same thing for people who are living with complex PTSD and trying to figure out how to get a path out of all that noise, and talk about all the things that I've learned along the way to help with that. And those are just ways that I make myself available to the world now.
And I will mention, I mentioned at the beginning that you are these days every so often coming to the Oregon Veterans Home in the Dalles where I live, and performing for free for the people there. And
I'll play anywhere if people, for instance, small towns in Oregon, Washington, if I can get to them. Folks want to do a thing, I play libraries, bars, restaurants, churches, fairs, markets. And I try to get out in the world. I can't do quite as much as I used to with my back the way it's been, but I still try to target places to go and be there as a person, not on a screen, right? Just talking to people who are wanting to find where we find that connection through the arts.
I'm just going to challenge the people who want me to listen. You haven't done a bar bat mitzvah yet. I'm waiting for that, so you can add that to your list of performances.
That'd be fun. I'll give it a try.
All right. Our guest today is the amazing Ken Scholes, and if you're looking up, it's Scholes, and the latest is Better Dreams, Fallen Seeds, and Other Handfuls of Hope. Thank you so much for spending your generous amount of time with us today. Keep on writing.
Anytime. Anytime. I'm so glad to do this with you, Roger. I am looking forward to the next time we talk.